Küçük bir teknik bilgilendirme yapayım. Ekranınızın sağ alt köşesinde bir tercüme butonu göreceksiniz. Hangi dilde dinlemek istiyorsanız o dilin seçeneğini işaretlerseniz konuşmaları o dilde duyacaksınız diyerek başlayayım. Tekrardan hoş geldiniz diyorum. Bugün burada neden buluştuk? Aslında Türkiye Yerel STK İnsani Forumu'nun e, etki analizi, sosyal etki analizi ve modelleme çalışmasını yaptık. Ve bunun bulgularını sunmak istedik. Bir yandan da küresel bağlamda yerelleşme tartışmalarına e, TİF'in çalışmaları nasıl bir katkı sağlıyor, nerelerde ne gibi etkileri var bunları anlamak istiyoruz. Çok kısaca TİF'ten bahsedebilirim. 2023 yılında Türkiye'nin güneydoğusundaki sıralı depremlerin ardından e, bir afet koordinasyonuna ihtiyaç duyuldu ve flash appeal üstünden de bir acil destek çağrısına çıktı Türkiye. Bunun ardından da OÇA bölgeye gelerek bir koordinasyon yürütmeye başladı. Ancak bu koordinasyonun yerele erişmesi gerektiğine inanan 64 sivil toplum kuruluşu bir forum yapısıyla bir araya geldi. Bu da koordinasyonun yerelleşmesini sağlamak ve yerelleşme çalışmalarını desteklemek üzere 2,5 yıllık bir deneyimi getirdi. Burada bu deneyimin sosyal etki analizini dinleyeceğiz panelin bir kısmında. Ancak öncelikle büyük uzlaşı taahhütlerinden birazcık bahsetmek istiyoruz. Çünkü TİF yürüttüğü bütün çalışmaları büyük uzlaşı taahhütlerinin doğrultusunda yürüttü. Bu bağlamda panelistlerimizin arasında Sayın Doktor Michael Köhler var. Kendisi Büyük Uzlaşı Büyükelçisi ve İnsani Yardım Sistemi'nin iyileştirilmesi için bir eş başkanlık yürütüyor. Ağustos 2019'dan Ocak 2024'e kadar Doktor Köhler Avrupa Komisyonu Sivil Koruma ve İnsani Yardım Operasyonu Genel Müdür Yardımcısı olarak görev yaptı. Dünya çapında da Avrupa Birliği İnsani Yardım faaliyetlerinin koordinasyonundan sorumlu. Hemen ardından Integrity Consulting'den Umutcan Yüksel araştırmanın bulgularını paylaşacak bizimle. Ve ardından Hayata Destek Derneği'nden Sema Genel Karaosmanoğlu, CDP'den Center for Disaster Philanthropy'den Tracy O'Hare ve KCOC'den Faye Lee TİF'e sundukları desteklerin küresel yerelleşme bağlamında nerelere oturduğunu tartışacak diyeyim. Sorularınızı chatten yazmanızı rica edeceğiz. Bir soru cevap kısmı göreceksiniz. Soruları da en sonda cevaplamaya niyetliyiz. Bir sözü Doktor Köhler'e bırakabilirim.
Yeah, thank you very much, Azuman. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you for the nice introduction, and good evening to all of you. Hoş geldiniz for this conference. And this reminds me of my first time in Turkey when I think some of you were probably not yet born. I went to the first time to Turkey in 1981 as a young university student. Ever since I'm in love with the country. So it's a precious occasion for me to talk to you, and unfortunately only online, because of course it would be much, much nicer to be in Ankara right now or in any other of the beautiful towns of Turkey and have this discussion. But in the absence of physical presence, at least we can talk online. And I find it really amazing, and I wanted to thank you very much, Umutcan, Azuman, and all the other organizers of the local humanitarian forum, to not only look at the local requirements and needs right now, but also bring in the international perspective that is, of course, represented here by the Grand Bargain. And this happens much too little, I would say. We need to have much more dialogue. Very often discussions in New York or Geneva or Rome or so, or in Brussels, where I am right now, are a little bit, over the heads of, what is happening in the local reality, really. And then there are discussions on the local level, fortunately, but there's not enough linkage with the global discussion, where perhaps international commitments are taken, where lessons are being learned from what happens on the local side. So I'm really happy about you bringing us together from both sides, and hope that this will be a good example for many others. Azeman, you already kindly introduced me. I would just like to say that In the Grand Bargain, obviously, we have 3 ambassadors leading the entire process. I have the honor of being one of them, but I'm accompanied by my colleagues, Dr. Jamila Mahmoud from Malaysia and Ambassador Manuel Bessler from Switzerland. And it was Manuel, actually, who visited Turkey last year and met with some of you in Ankara. I think there was a meeting with SEMA, for example. This was very much in the context of the meeting of the National Reference Group in Turkey, together with the Localization Advocacy Group. This was the first contact that we had in this regard that I'm very happy to continue in this context. So what I would like to do in the next couple of minutes, if you agree, is to share with you some key reflections on 3 topics. One is, where do we stand today with the Grand Bargain, and which progress have we made or are we about to make? The second one is, which are the key initiatives that we have been conducting in the past months? And thirdly, how has our engagement at country level evolved? Let me start by recapping a little bit where we are and where do we stand with the Grand Bargain. Grand Bargain, I apologize for the strange name, but I usually call it a big international agreement in order to render humanitarian aid more effective and efficient, but also basically to bring it up to purpose right now in a world that is rapidly changing and where the conditions for humanitarian aid in many regards are rapidly changing. We're going to come back to that. Grand Bargain, as you know, is an offspring of the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in 2016. And we started at the time with 10 work streams and 51 commitments and about 16 signatories that formed part of this Grand Bargain. Now, about 8-9 years later, we are in the 3rd phase, and so-called Grand Bargain 3.0, which will still run through 2026. And here we focus on 2 work streams, 2 focal areas. Focal area 1 concerns quality funding, localization, and participation. These are the central commitments of the World Humanitarian Summit back in 2016. But then we also have focus area 2, the more innovative areas that we were charged to further in 2023 at our annual meeting. And this concerns anticipatory action, innovative financing, the nexus, and a new donor architecture, reaching out to new donors. Now, in all fairness, we cannot claim that we have achieved sweeping transformation of the sector, and certainly not to the level that we had hoped for at the issuing of the process. But fair is it to say that there are real shifts, that there are real developments, and particularly when it comes to localization. As of October last year, 24, in our self-reporting cycle, the participants, the signatures of the Grand Bargain have to send reports every year about how and in which regard they are implementing the achievements and the commitments that they take in the Grand Bargain context. 44 signatories of the 71 that we have right now reported having developed or adapted strategies and policies to fund local actors directly, or at least more directly. This is a meaningful policy shift, both among donors, actually, and aid organizations. Because it means that localization is no longer a side discussion, it has become central to the way we work. Actually, it becomes increasingly the new norm of humanitarian work. We have a 25% target for funding local and national actors. So of all the official development assistance that goes into humanitarian aid, at least 25% should benefit directly local and national actors as directly as possible. And this remains an important milestone. We are, to be honest, very far from achieving this benchmark. Some, to their honor, have already exceeded it. But by and large, most of the donors and most of the aid organizations are still heading towards it. But there is momentum. There is momentum. Some donors have made changes to enable direct funding to local actors. Where that is not possible for political or for legal reasons, They have relied on the clause that prescribes funding as directly as possible. And that means using only one intermediary between the source of finance and the local actor, or, for example, using pooled funds, which have by and large proven to be quite effective tools for putting funds in the hands of local actors. But localization, of course, and I preach to the convert here, is not just about money. It's not just about percentages. It's basically a fundamental shift in the mindset towards a new mindset that prioritizes trust in local leadership, that embraces equitable partnerships, and changes how decisions are made and who has the authority to take decisions. Real localization means investing in autonomy, in agency, and the voice of local actors, not just as implementing partners, but as co-creators of solutions. And that means, of course, that they need to be involved in the entire implementation and planning cycle of humanitarian operations, from needs assessments to strategy establishment, to programming, to identification, and to monitoring and perhaps evaluation after the action. All that needs to be done together in partnership. And only once we achieve that, we have real localization, we have real partnership between outside donors and local capacity. Now, in order to get to that, we need money, yes, of course, but we need more. We need, for example, simplified reporting requirements. We need to have adapted due diligence requirements. We need to have shared risk models. We need to have fair overhead policies. We need to have a better tracking of the funding. And we need to have capacity sharing initiatives that help shift power towards local actors. So there's still a long way to go. A lot needs to be done. Quality funding, which means, as you all know, multi-annual funding, flexible funding, predictable funding, all that is a critical enabler of localization. When funding is more adaptable and less constrained by bureaucracy, it allows for timely, local-driven, and context-sensitive responses. Now, the Norwegian Refugee Council in 2023 has established a catalogue of quality funding practices, and this catalogue by NRC showcases promising developments, such as multi-annual agreements, allocations for capacity strengthening, reduced earmarking of funding, greater flexibility, and lower compliance burdens. Some of these approaches, though outside the classic definition of quality funding, have real and tangible impacts and make humanitarian aid more responsive, locally led, and inclusive. We have in the Grand Bargain also established communities of practice. These are groups that bring together interested shareholders and stakeholders in several areas, like localization, like risk sharing, like a community of practice on the role of intermediaries, where signatories, so the participants of the Grand Bargain, share lessons, best practice, can learn from each other, and can inspire each other. So there is progress. But despite all of that, we want to see more change in some of these key areas by 2026, when the current mandate of the Grand Bargain runs out. And therefore, last year, we have agreed on an implementation agenda to bring sharper focus and help drive real transformation, especially around localization, equitable partnerships, and quality financing. Signatories of the Grand Bargain, those 71 partners, are expected to continue advancing this agenda. Time will tell us where we stand, and I can tell you the challenges are quite huge, but they're also huge chances, and therefore we need to keep the momentum. Let me dwell a bit on the recent initiatives that we have been launching in order to keep the momentum alive on all these things. And this, of course, is very much provoked, if you so want, by the dramatically changing operational environment in 2020. And this is so much more than just the developments in the United States administration, the demise of USAID, and so forth. We have lots of problems. Crises have become more protracted. They've become also more politicized and complex. Humanitarian principles are under threat. International humanitarian law doesn't call the same authority that it did before, unfortunately. And of course, the funding landscape is deteriorating, coming on top of all of that. You all know, and I don't need to tell you in any detail, how much the funding cuts from a number of major donors that we are experiencing actually for quite some time, but particularly since this year, how much these funding cuts have sent shock waves across the humanitarian system. Or should I say, across the established humanitarian system, because obviously there are also new emerging players, local players, that don't depend to the same extent on traditional funding streams and have established their own funding basis. But still, there are many local organizations, and certainly also in Turkey, that depend on the classic form of humanitarian financing, the classic overseas official development assistance. And these organizations, unfortunately, have been very much hit by the funding cuts. They, in our observation, are sometimes even the most exposed to the new harsh financial realities. They are often a little bit less resourced, but they are also more exposed to the cuts, and therefore they are hit in the hardest way. Many of them had to reduce operations, had to lay off staff, or even shut down entirely. And this is not only a drama for the operations that they are conducting, not only for the people concerned, but it also risks to jeopardize the entire achievements of the Grand Bargain, or the reform agenda that we launched since 2016 on localization and so many other issues are at risk right now, because there is a certain tendency in parts of the donor community to say, if we have less money, let's return back to basics. Let's just reduce on the very essentials. Let's not continue with all these fancy reform ideas like localization, but just do, so to say, what is absolutely required to save lives. I don't need to emphasize how much I'm against this kind of interpretation. I think this is now the hour where we need to perform reform, where we need to see how much, for example, localization is not only an element that makes the humanitarian aid more equitable, but also more efficient and also more effective. And therefore, going the full way of reform is a way of addressing the crunch, the financial crisis of the sector. We see that local actors show remarkable resilience. Many of them are quickly adapting, they're innovating, they're leading community-based responses. Mutual aid groups, for example, are a powerful example of their agility and local rootedness. Now, having said that, operationalizing localization in real-time crisis contexts is still a challenge. Local actors often lack access to adequate funding modalities and to decision-making spaces. They face growing bureaucratic hurdles that limit their ability to respond effectively and quickly. They face physical risks, but they also carry reputational, legal, and financial risks without sufficient risk-sharing mechanisms. And even where they have the capacity to lead, local actors are often constrained by politicization and an enabling environment that works against them. So the world becomes more difficult in many crises for local actors. This shows clearly that localization is about much more than just funding flows, as I said. It's about building a real ecosystem, an ecosystem that includes governments, donors, UN agencies, the Red Crescent, the Red Cross, INGOs, and most importantly, of course, local actors. Each one of them has a role. They need to share responsibility, but in a system where local actors are in the lead and not just at the end of the food chain. And therefore, I think and I hope that this current financial crisis could also become a turning point. As the international system recognizes its limits, there's growing realization and that sustainable, effective humanitarian responses must be locally led. This becomes generally acknowledged. We need to make sure that it does not only stay lip service, but becomes a reality in aid management. The recent donor cuts have disrupted saving life through aid. They have jeopardized partnerships and strained them. They risked undoing nearly a decade of progress of the Grand Bargain, including on localization. Local actors, unfortunately, still depend on a small number of donors, and that makes them particularly vulnerable. with some of them seeing their contracts even terminated overnight. We need to address that, and that is what we are trying to do in the Grand Bargain. I would like to familiarize you with 3 initiatives that we have been launching over the past weeks and months. First, since February, we launched our signatures and brought together about 100 stakeholders across different regions and sectors to navigate the crisis through a number of initiatives. On the one hand, we launched a caucus on emergency measures, so a group of major players in the humanitarian system that try to agree on measures, donors, organizations, and so forth, concrete actions that would help local organizations and others that are particularly struck by the financial crisis. For example, through the fast tracking of the implementation of core commitments for enhancing efficiency and effectiveness measures in this year and next year. Actions aim to preserve and empower effective local partners, protect core functions within the humanitarian architecture, safeguard principled and needs-based assistance during this crisis. And all this is rooted in Grand Bargain commitments. We have now published the statement of this caucus. It's on the web, it's in LinkedIn and many other social media for some days now. And we are collecting additional support from basically all the players in the sector that they would line up to these principles and guide the 2025 and 2026 action and programming on this basis. The key element, as I said, is that localization needs to be a priority and cannot be the first thing to be cut when you have less money. But as I said, the present crisis is not only financial. There's also a deeper legitimacy and credibility challenge for the overcome the traditional humanitarian system. And because of that, the Grand Bargain brought together a diverse group of stakeholders from around the world, academics, humanitarians, thought leaders, financial experts, governments, think tanks, in 2 reform-focused workshops, one in Brussels and one online, to discuss the future of humanitarian assistance. We discussed how people in crisis, in disasters such as earthquakes, might receive assistance in the future, and what some key characteristics of such systems might be. And finally, and also this has become public now, we have commissioned an independent strategic foresight think piece. So a study, if you so want, about 40 pages long, that stress tests the present humanitarian system, that challenges the present system against the already identifiable, but also perhaps presumed developments of the future, and develops possible future scenarios for the humanitarian system and derives from that some key requirements of how a future humanitarian system should look alike. This study, which you also find on the web in the meantime, highlights the need for fundamental transformation in how aid is conceptualized and delivered, offering a valuable foundation for rethinking the evolution of the sector. And there again, localization and full empowerment of local actors in a system that has a totally different power sharing approach than the present one are absolutely key to the response if we want to keep humanitarian aid alive, credible, and legitimate. All this feeds, of course, also indirectly into some other process like the humanitarian reset launched by the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator and the UN-80 discussion about reform of the United Nations system. But that is perhaps not our main subject here. Therefore, let me finally ask, what does this all mean for the country level? And that is what you are concerned about. Now, in October last year, the Grand Bargain signatories agreed to revitalize the national reference groups, the so-called NRGs. There are the national reference groups, not everybody may be fully aware with the term, are national platforms where Grand Bargain signatories, led by local and national actors, come together to share lessons on Grand Bargain commitment implementation, to address the most pressing issues locally, and to feed country-level expertise into global annual meetings of the Grand Bargain. So you can say that the national reference groups are about contextualizing in a local environment grand bargain commitments. And not only the localization commitments, all commitments. They provide a space to discuss both progress and obstacles at the national level, and maybe also to discuss how to navigate the current crisis. National reference groups now exist in multiple contexts. Within our current capacity, we engage more structurally with NRGs in Lebanon, in Ukraine, Turkey, Myanmar, the Philippines, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And also, as I said in the beginning, we engaged with Turkey's NRG last year. We, and that means the ambassadors, we see these NRGs as essential. They provide local and national actors a platform to engage with international organizations and donors on equal footing, helping to drive conversations on localization, on participation, and other commitments. Coordination platforms of local and national actors, such as the local humanitarian forum in Turkey, are also crucial. They help facilitate structured engagement, leadership, advocacy, domestic resource mobilization, and dialogue with national authorities. Where national reference groups exist, such coordination mechanisms can feed into them. We would therefore encourage direct exchange and learning between the national reference groups in different countries. This is not just about advocacy, it's also about co-developing real solutions, solutions that work both for local actors and the taxpayers in donors' countries. Let me just conclude. We cannot just continue to talk about power shifting without making real structural change. This is a matter of credibility, obviously. The time for incremental steps, in our view, is over. It has passed. We now need to be bold. We need to have systemic reform. We cannot just pay lip service, for example, to local leadership. We need to put local leadership at the center, not as a favor, but as a requirement for relevance and legitimacy, for better effectiveness of our action. Therefore, I would like to urge you to move forward with platforms such as the one that you built. Use the grand bargain commitments as a tool to engage international actors and to commit them. Share your experiences globally, participate in shaping the future of humanitarian aid. Because localization is not just a technical adjustment, it's a political choice. But it's a choice that demands a fundamental rewiring of the system, from power sharing to power ceding. If we are serious about serving affected populations, then localization is not an option. It is simply the only viable path forward. Thank you very much and good luck for the entire discussion.
Teşekkür ederiz. Sayın Doktor Köhler aslında çok önemli noktalara değindi ve yerelleşmenin sadece bir takım bütçesel çalışmaların haricinde bir yaklaşım ve yaklaşımı değiştirmeye yönelik bir alanı olduğundan bahsetti. Bir zihniyet değişimine ihtiyaç olduğundan bahsetti. Bir yandan sivil alanda sık sık şunu konuşmaya başladık. Etkilenen topluluk odaklı çalışmayı nasıl şekillendirebiliriz? Bunu projelerimizde konuşuyoruz ama çalışma mantığımız için bunu çok fazla konuşmadığımız zamanlar oluyor. Yerelleşme bunun için iyi bir alan. Şimdi Integrity Consulting'den Umutcan Yüksel bize TİF'in 2,5 yıllık deneyiminde bu alandaki hani yerelleşmeye yönelik yalnızca teknik düzenlemeler değil, aslında politik değişimlerin de sağlanması için ne gibi çalışmalar yapılmış onu aktaracak, araştırmanın bulgularını sunacak deyip Umutcan'a sözü vereyim.
Çok teşekkürler Asuman. Asuman, if you can share the screen, the presentation, then I can start the presenting the findings. Good morning, good afternoon, and evening to all participants joining from around the world. So I'm here to present the findings of the social impact analysis of the local humanitarian forum, or LHF, which emerged during the 2023 earthquake response in Turkey. And then basically I'll share the key findings from the analysis and try to contribute to the evidence to global localization discourse. Next slide, please. So a bit of background information. On February 6, 2023, two major earthquakes struck the southeastern Turkey, affecting around 14 million people. And following the emergency appeal of OCHA, the local humanitarian forum was established within the weeks as a coordination platform to enhance the local civil society organizations' participation in these coordination mechanisms. Rapidly, LHF grew to include 64 members and different organizations across the four most affected provinces, namely Hatay, Kahramanmaraş, Malatya, and Adıyaman. For the key achievement of LHF was that for the first time in Turkey's humanitarian response history, local NGOs gained a representation and chair in the humanitarian country team, what is it called, UNCT Plus in Turkey. LHF mobilized around 30 million Turkish lira or $1 million from 5 philanthropic donors, and the LHF also distributed around 87 microgrants totaling to 12 million Turkish lira to local organizations. And our evaluation or the social impact analysis relied on the mixed method that included around 36 structured survey responses from diverse organizations, key informant interviews with 22 stakeholders being UN agencies, donor organizations, grassroots local organizations, and the national civil society actors. On top of that, we have carried out a systematic documentation review of the documents related to LHF. And the study was conducted between May and June 2025 to examine both tangible and intangible impacts of the LHF model. Next slide, please. The LHF model has demonstrated basically three primary innovations that Dr. Köhler already mentioned some of them in his opening speech. The first one, our data showed that 62% of the respondents rated LHF as effective in enabling local civil society participation in UN-led mechanisms, coordination mechanisms, which usually exclude the grassroots organizations. So this represented a significant shift from traditional coordination structures where local actors typically have observer status at best scale. And LHF members participated in cluster meetings, strategic discussions, planning sessions, resource allocation discussions. Secondly, capacity building has emerged or capacity development has emerged as LHF's highest impact area, even though it was not the initial intention of why LHF is formed out, with especially 56% of the respondents reporting a high impact in the capacity building. So this also contributed to the coordination aspect, but also different models were implemented, including peer-to-peer learning events among the local grassroots organizations and between national and local NGOs. There has been on-job mentorship activities during the microgrant implementation, and most importantly, humanitarian terminology, which is often too technical, is translated into Turkish, removing the language barrier so that the participation of local actors has increased a lot. Thirdly, our analysis showed that around 39%, approximately 40% of this €1 million that LHF gained from 5 philanthropic donors were channeled directly to the local and grassroots organizations. The average grant size was around 140,000 Turkish lira, and again, touching upon what Dr. Köhler mentioned about the grant bargain commitment of 25% of the funding channeled to the local organizations, we can see that 40% is quite above this commitment, but also the remaining 60% were also meaningful for local organizations' participation, because LHF deployed 4 field-level coordinators stationed in the affected provinces, carrying out a kind of bridging role between the local grassroots organizations and the UN-led coordination mechanism. They have established 2 coordination infrastructure with physical hubs, which enabled, again, the participation of the local actors and provided the technical support and accompaniment for the first-time grant recipients. So that's why we are not talking about the percentage of 40% of the budget that has channeled to local organizations, but also beyond that, there has been a lot of operational support. If we can move to the third slide, Osman. Yes, and let's talk about the tangible and intangible impacts that LHF has made. First of all, 35% of the micro grants were specifically designed to target marginalized populations. So that includes around 9 projects focusing on disability inclusion, 4 projects strengthening women's organizations presence, and for the first time, semi-nomadic populations, Dom, Abdal, and Roman groups were also included in the micro grants. LHF established a local coordination and development centers in Malatya and Hatay, and these centers provided a physical meeting space for the local NGOs, information sharing hubs, and basically a natural informal venues for coordination meetings, post-project evaluations, or basically where local actors can become together and have basically tea and an informal discussion. And grant distribution phases also showed us LHF followed the disaster response strategy. In the first phase, between August, October, they focused on needs assessments, identifying the basic needs. And in the second phase, until June 2024, after the initial shock of the earthquake, it focused on network building, coordination, and more addressing the emergency needs. Then in the last phase, which ended in November 2024, they focused mostly on the institutional strengthening. More on the intangible shifts or the impacts, surely we see a change in the power dynamics, especially shift in the decision-making power. Local organizations gained collective bargaining capacity, negotiation capacity, especially multiple respondents note that the international actors began to recognize local organizations as strategic partners rather than just implementers or intermediaries. LHF also enhanced the trust and legitimacy. Community acceptance was at the center of the LHF. So the community acceptance of aid improved when delivering the assistance through local networks. It gained a lot of acceptance from the communities, culturally adopted the classical and traditional humanitarian principles. And lastly, the evaluation found also evidence of sustained collaboration between LHF members beyond the formal meetings. So those who receive for the first time micro grants apply for another funding opportunities. They created their own informal alliances in the locations, and they were able to function independently from the LHF structure also. So that's supported a lot about the sustainability aspect. Next slide, please. And on top of these positive influence that we have seen with the establishment of LHF, we also identify significant challenges and struggles regarding the LHF's impact and sustainability. First, on the sustainability, only 25% of the respondents perceived that LHF structure as sustainable without a continued donor funding. This is also because by late 2024, that I mentioned about the field coordinators, field focal points of LHF, they discontinued these positions basically because of the funding constraints. This effectively dismantled the LHF's provincial presence, even though there has been engagement and handover process that was in place. 43% of the respondents basically reported either low or no impact on the policy influence. This also indicates the limited success in achieving the systemic change despite the operational achievement. But this also tells us something related to power dynamics within the humanitarian system in Turkey. So how UN agencies perceived LHF, how government donor organizations perceived LHF and collaborated accordingly, identify the policy influence level. And that brings us to the donor engagement. No major institutional donors has provided direct funding to LHF. What we see, and then we have participants from all these organizations as well, CDP, KCOC, and some other philanthropic donors provided flexible funds for LHF to conduct an experimental learning process. Despite the traditional approaches of basically not allowing any mistakes, LHF created a safe spaces for mistakes. But these funding constraints created also a challenge for LHF to perform its actual value. And donors also highlighted that unclear governance mechanism of LHF, perception of duplication, because there were UN-led coordination mechanism at one hand and the local coordination mechanism that LHF created. So there has been a perception about the perception of duplication with the existing coordination mechanisms. And the lack of formal status also impacted that. One more aspect to highlight is the government relation. I think LHF is showing us a great example how localization can be advanced in middle income countries, because localization is often linked to the humanitarian assistance, which is often implemented in so-called failed states, where there is no government structure or limited government structure. But Turkey is showing us another example in the leadership of government-led response in the middle income country with the existing structures, how LHF can or similar models or forums can influence the localization debate. And I think that's an important lessons learned. One more issue to maybe mention that is there has been a slight monitoring and evaluation framework within the LHF. So even though these tangible and intangible impacts are very important, there has been issues with regards to the systematic monitoring of the achievements, documenting case studies, success stories in the implementation period. That's why one of the interview we mentioned that like think LHF as a bag with apples and each with just one bite taken. So a lot of promising activities, but not sustained due to these operational constraints. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what LHF provided possible, so that firstly it clearly showcased that local actors can self-organize at a scale during a major crisis and the disaster response. Alternative funding mechanisms are viable, and trust-based approach through flexible funding is possible to especially increase the community acceptance and participation. Instead of one-off trainings from the international actors mentioning a lot of technical terms, peer learning and learning from diverse experience outperforms the traditional capacity building approach. And the local coordination, most importantly, enhance the duplicated response mitigation measures. There are critical factors, though, even if LHF proved there is a possibility of implementing such actions. The first one is that LHF needs to set up the legal and institutional framework to have a formal decision-making mechanism, clear governance structures with different roles and responsibilities, and a clear definition of the scope, whether LHF being a coordination forum or a disaster response platform for the future sustainability. And it needs to establish evidence and accountability systems to systematically collect data and the perceptions, create a regular reporting mechanisms, also to address the concerns from the institutional donor side. So to create a sustainable funding models, multi-year commitments, again in line with the grant bargain areas, and the diverse funding resources to reduce the dependency and the core funding basically for the coordination structure. We can move to my last slide, where I will be talking about the specific recommendations. This study has shown something very critical. LHF as a forum showed us that local leadership in the coordination mechanism is possible. But as Dr. Köhler mentioned, every stakeholder has a responsibility to contribute and to enhance this forum and the similar forums. So we need to clarify a line on how we can improve such homegrown initiative, sustainable, effective, and challenging the traditional humanitarian system. So one aspects that we come across throughout the KIIs with different actors, there has been a debate within LHF. While they were seeking to disrupt the system with the local leadership, there was also an initiation or intention to simultaneously seeking inclusion within that system. So that is a kind of global lessons learned from all other forums or the coordination mechanisms as well. So we need to continue challenging that system. For donors, what is important is to adjust the funding approach, to recognize the coordination infrastructure as programmatic costs, provide a multi-year core functioning funding for local platforms, accept a higher indirect cost rates, especially for transformation, and secondly, the risk assessments or the compliance procedures, legal procedures when it comes to the donor assessment. It needs to be in line to include local and grassroots actors to make the humanitarian aid culturally adaptable and possible. And it needs to gain the value, especially when it comes to local knowledge in risk mitigation. An enabling environment. There has been an important influence of donors in advancing the localization debate globally, but also in Turkey. So for that reason, donors have a step or role to play when it comes to linkaging local actors with the UN-led mechanism, with their advocacy, not only by providing flexible or committed donors. For local actors or the future coordination initiatives, what is important is that LHF and the similar forums need to define a clear identity from the inception. Whether the platform serves for emergency response or long-term coordination, and develop to have a formal terms of reference from the onset of the operation, and the secure legal status within the first 6 months ahead. And last 2 points maybe before concluding is that LHF needs to build an evidence system to enhance its experiences. Personally, I have seen a lot of tangible and intangible impacts at the local level that created a huge difference in the way we approach to humanitarian assistance. But LHF didn't succeed when it comes to disseminating this knowledge, disseminating these experiences. So this is the first event to start doing that, but there has to be more and more evidence provided to donors. And for sustainability, there has to be dialogue between UN and donor organizations and local actors to ensure funding diversification for such a forum and create the transition plans basically for international support. And lastly, to build up a government relationship which was not in place when it comes to the LHF model, because of what I mentioned. In middle income countries like Turkey, where the government is leading the disaster response and other response like refugee issues, they need to be in line with such localization initiatives. So thanks for listening. I'll stop here, and I hope that the study we have made would contribute to the both Turkey level and global level localization discourse and discussion. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler Umutcan. Burada TİF'in sistem bozucu etkisini duymayı ben açıkçası seviyorum da. Yani son 1 yıldır TİF'in koordinatörü olarak çalışma şansına eriştim. Bu çalışmaların içinde yer alma şansına eriştim. Ve aslında TİF'in sonuç odaklı değil, süreç odaklı bir öğrenme deneyimi olduğunu düşünmeye başladım bir yerden sonrasında. Bir yandan da çok senin de anlattığın gibi, yani Umutcan'ın bahsettiği gibi aslında operasyonel yanı çok gelişmiş bir forum yapısı. Doğrudan operasyonu uygulayan bir forum yapısı. Dolayısıyla bir yandan da forum yapılarını tekrar düşünmeyi de gerektiriyor. Burada Yerelleşme Savunuculuk Grubu'nun önderliğinde Hayata Destek Derneği ve Sivil Toplum Geliştirme Merkezi tarafından kuruldu TİF. Şu anda da Hayata Destek Derneği'nin ev sahipliğinde çalışmalarını yürütüyor. Yürütme kurulundaysa 2 yerel örgüt, bir bölgesel örgüt, bir mülteci odaklı kurulmuş olan örgüt ve 3 tane de ulusal örgüt bulunuyor. Burada TİF'e operasyonel ve uzmanlık desteği sağlayan Hayata Destek Derneği'nden Sema'ya sözü vermek istiyorum. Bu süreci desteklemek yerelleşme çalışmalarında nerede duruyordu, sizin için ne ifade ediyordu diyerek sözü bırakıyorum.
Çok teşekkürler Asuman. Umutcan, thank you very much for the research results. And hello to our panelists and to our participants. We are 83 at the moment, so it's wonderful to see such a big group interested in locally led action and the possibilities of what we can achieve as local organizations pick up on that leadership and challenge the way things are currently being done in the aid sector. So I would like to welcome everyone. It's great to see such a big crowd. And for me, I'm honored to be hosting this session, but even more honored to be a host of the local humanitarian forum, and of course, a part of the journey, of the LHF journey since the very beginning. And what I would like to highlight from some of the research results that Umutcan has shared with us, I think it's very important that the LHF has created a safe space. I think that word safe is very, very important because we don't have much room to maneuver currently within the aid system. Everything's very much predefined. We don't take much risk. So really creating that space for local civil society to be able to come together, to co-design, to co-learn, to jointly solve problems, and also, to be able to learn from each other. And I think we've been able to use this space, the forum space, to come up with different ways of doing things. And we have been, of course, doing a lot of advocacy in terms of how things can be done differently. I'm also very happy to hear that the forum has given visibility and legitimacy to local organizations and specific risk groups that were marginalized in the post-earthquake recovery period, and it has given them the possibility to interact with the international system. And it also demonstrates that locally managed coordination is possible. And it should continue, I think, especially at a time when the international aid community is planning its own transition. And of course, as local organizations, as local civil society, we talk a lot about solidarity, about justice, about care. These are all values that we hold dear as local civil society. And as values are being challenged now, both globally and within the aid sector, really looking at how we can redefine some of those values. So this point for me is also very interesting as local civil society to be able to come up with our own ways of doing things and our own approach. For me, of course, it's been very impressive to see that the LHF has gone far beyond just the coordination, because initially when we set up the local humanitarian forum, we wanted to make sure we were present in the UN-led, the OCHA-led coordination system right after the publication of the flash appeal. And we wanted to make sure that we were visible and present, but also an active participant. But it has actually gone much beyond the coordination, as we see. We've created impact on stronger capacities as a result, new ways of dispersing funding to a broad range of community groups and civic initiatives, and also supporting advocacy for and by local actors. So I'm really impressed that we've, at the end of the day, managed to do a lot more than what we set off initially. And throughout this 2-year journey, perhaps the most important realization for us as civil society was the fact that we should not be focusing merely on linking ourselves with the UN-led coordination system. And for us, it has been important to turn inward and to see how we as civil society can create our own structures, and then how we can link those with the UN-led mechanisms. Of course, as long as they're present, because these systems are set up at times of crisis. They're there for a while and then they pull out. So for us, really focusing on how can we do this our own way and find ways of existing before and of course after crises hits. So for me, this has been a bold shift in our thinking. And I think this has not always been welcome. In fact, the study does capture quite well the pushback that we have faced from some international actors, especially when we started demonstrating that, you know, how things can be done more effectively and more cost efficiently when led and managed by local actors. And just to maybe briefly illustrate, $2 million had actually been allocated to OCHA for a 3-month coordination period during the flash appeal. And LHF has been operating for over 2 years on only half that amount. And the forum has actually redistributed nearly half of that, of those resources to its members. And I think that's a striking example of what locally managed coordination is able to achieve, both in terms of impact and in terms of value for money. So, you know, the fact that LHF has been seen as a threat, to me, is proof that it has also been challenging the power dynamics around how much funding is designated to coordination efforts and who gets to dominate that funding. So for me, I can definitely say that this is one of LHF's great success, that it not only created an inclusive platform for local leadership, but it also challenged the existing power structures. And that has shown what is possible when you know, when we trust and we're able to support you know, the capacities that are already there at the local level. I can say that on my part, as Support to Life, as a national NGO, you know, trying to also find our way and our role within this whole localization discourse and practice, we have actually found ourselves being challenged by members of LHF in what local really means, because local in itself is very, very diverse and it's very nuanced. And for us as STL, we have also learned to share our leadership and to be more inclusive of the diversity of local organizations that are out there. So I'm truly grateful for that as well, because it has been a learning for my organization as well. So I'd like to thank the LHF members for challenging us along the way, for challenging the narrative of the aid sector, for challenging our presets and fixed ways of how we operate in the sector. One final point I'd like to emphasize is this entire initiative has been made possible by philanthropic support. And I would like to turn and thank our supporters who are present here, 2 of them, KCOC, Faye, and Tracy from CDP, together with our 2 partners here, Vitol Foundation, SDZ, a German Society for Coordination, Consulting and Training, as well as Global Giving. And they have believed in our passion to set up these alternative mechanisms led and managed by local civil society. So I'm very thankful for your trust and support, and we hope to be doing more together. But this also tells us that traditional humanitarian donors, whether bilateral or multilateral, they yet have to fully trust and invest in such models. But as the study shows, the results speak for themselves. And I feel that now we have the strong evidence to back further investment in structures like the LHF. So thanks to you also, Umutcan, for bringing out these points in your report. And my biggest thanks goes to the LHF Secretariat, who have been very innovative in how they shape the LHF journey, and their tremendous effort in listening to and opening up that space for all the different and the diverse voices that are out there. Of course, this is a journey, and it's a journey yet to continue. It has been a learning experience for all of us. It hasn't been perfect, of course, but it surely has been very, very powerful. And especially now at times when aid funding is tight, when global systems are under pressure, it's clearer how essential community-led solutions like LHF truly are. And for this reason, we are actually now preparing to see, again, with support from our partner from our SDP, on how we can formalize LHF's role into a locally led funding mechanism. This wasn't something that we initially designed for, but we feel that there's a lot of potential to turn this into a funding mechanism that could work longer term. And not just setting it up for traditional donors, but also looking at non-traditional and domestic resources. So we are preparing for a co-design process, and we're very excited about the potential that this has in terms of creating a pilot for a localized funding scheme. So we've come this far, and going forward now, for us, it's important to look at, how can we make sure initiatives like LHF are not only, struggling to survive, but actually thrive, and how we can use them as tangible shifts in terms of how we operate in the aid community. And of course, what role can each one of us have in making that shift and in making it long lasting are some of the issues that we need to look further at. So thank you very much for all being here. I hope that everyone present here has been inspired by the change that is possible as led by local actors. And I hope this inspires new ideas, new connections, and bolder steps going forward. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkürler Sema katkıların için. Burada aslında bu güç yapısını değiştirmeye çalışırken TİF'i destekleyen birbirinden değerli donörleri vardı. Ve bu süreçte şunu fark ettik aslında. Hibenin sağlanma biçimi ve hibeyi sağlayan kurumun yaklaşımı doğrudan uygulamayı etkileyen bir şey. Dolayısıyla donörlerimiz de bu yerelleşme yaklaşımıyla ve partnere ciddi bir güven ilişkisi içinde çalıştığı için biz bu kadar şeyi yapmaya fırsat bulabildik diyebilirim. Ve hala yerelleşme çalışmalarını destekleyen gruplar olduğunuz için teşekkür ederim. Biz burada güç yapısını değiştirmeye çalışırken bir yandan sistemdeki ilişkiselliği de değiştirmeye çalıştık aslında. Bunlardan en önemli örneği insani yardım alanındaki aktörlerle sivil alandaki tematik çalışan sivil toplum örgütlerini bir araya getirebildiğimiz bir yapı kurmaktı. Sevgili Sema'nın konuşmasında yerel vurgusunun nasıl olduğuna dair bazı noktalar vardı. Biz TİF'teki çalışmalarda biraz yerel vurgusunu da nasıl değiştirebiliriz, yerel olarak kimi tanımlıyoruz sorusu üstüne çok düşündük. Burada 64 üyemizin haricinde sahada yüzlerce partnerle birlikte çalıştık. Haritalama çalışmaları yaptık ve mahalle örgütlerine, yeni kurulmuş inisiyatiflere, örgütlenme özgürlüğünü kullanarak aslında aktif vatandaşlık çalışmasının içinde bulunmak isteyen bireylerin kurduğu sivil toplum örgütlerine destek olduk diyebilirim. Burada da bu güç yapısını değiştirmeye çalışırken bizi birkaç farklı projeyle destekleyen CDP'ye sözü vermek istiyorum. Sevgili Tracy bize bu sürecin onların tarafında nasıl yaşandığını aktaracaktır.
Hello, everyone. I first want to just say thank you for including the Center for Disaster Philanthropy in this event today. It has been a real privilege for us to be a partner in this transformative work, and for that, we're very grateful. Thinking today about what were the reasons that CDP sought to support LHF, and we also support some similar networks in other locations as well. CDP is dedicated to the best possible equitable impact of disaster recovery work, and that requires system change and real exploration of what's possible in terms of locally determined recovery. So I think, having heard all the presentation this morning and the information that was shared, I would actually say that the alignment between what CDP is seeking to support and the work that the LHF has done is extraordinarily clear to me. CDP makes grants and supports disaster recovery work guided by principles and approaches that seek to drive equitable recovery. And when I review that list of our values and principles, and I look at what work the LHF has done, the alignment is just so clear. We seek to support community-led and driven approaches, especially ones that seek to drive autonomy and agency for local partners. I really appreciated those words this morning. That's really in line with what we're attempting to support and to drive. We are focused on equity, looking at the needs of historically or marginalized at-risk populations, addressing those inequities, and ensuring that responses and recovery, disaster recovery really includes an equity lens, so that those communities come out of a disaster better included and not worse off than others. We are committed to capacity strengthening. We are committed to partnership with our grantees. We look to support long-term recovery initiatives, and we want to cultivate partnerships built on trust and transparency. That's overall CDP works both domestically in the US and internationally. And our international funds team in particular prioritizes approaches that support the decolonization agenda and localization. And I can't think of a better example than what we've heard of this morning of this work that looks to see how we can reframe who's at the center of disaster recovery work. We prioritize programs in complex humanitarian settings, fragile settings. We look to do system strengthening and to approach tackling the root causes of inequities in systems, approaches that focus on recovery and building resilience. I have a long list here, but I would say one thing I would want to highlight is we want to support innovation and things that we think have meaning for other communities. And I can't, once again, just going through this list, there's just such a connection between the ways that the LHF has really grown and pushed the boundaries in what can be accomplished when local actors are centered. And so we really appreciate the alignment that we've been able to find, and are just really thinking about all the great ways that this kind of work can have meaning if replicated elsewhere. And I think that is a great step forward in terms of localization. So as I said, I had a longer list, but as I was reading through it, preparing for this event this morning, the question I think I was asked to reflect on is why did CDP support the LHF? But the question I was asking myself is, why wouldn't we support the LHF? There's just so many reasons. I couldn't think of a reason why we wouldn't, given the strong connection between this type of work and the kind of work that CDP sees as so vital to ensuring that disaster impacted communities are centered, and when they're centered, their needs are better met. And I think that is really what we as humanitarians are attempting to do, is to support people to have a voice in their needs and to meet those needs. So I think as we heard in the impact study presentation, the work done by the LHF has highlighted just truly what kind of impact locally led, locally driven recovery can have. LHF fostered and implemented community-based interventions and locally led activities. It is clearly rooted in locally driven recovery. It has centered local expertise, exchange, and collaboration by creating a space for improved coordination among actors on the ground. And I would say not just creating a space, but lifting up the voice of actors into a system that maybe didn't always give us space for that voice. That directly challenges the systems, creates a challenge to systems to better include those voices in the future. The LHF helped create meaningful and equal partnership opportunities. And I really appreciated the word disruption, which has come up a few times. I think that's an important part of this. We don't want to, it's a balance, I think, of disrupting at the same time, making things move along and seeing how we can ensure that we are better inclusive as a humanitarian community. So I really appreciate that that approach. Finally, I think we need to acknowledge that this type of approach is the most sustainable and it has the most long-term impact. A project like this, while it may be structured in terms of, we have a proposal, we're going to do it for this amount of time, it builds local capacity in a way that leaves communities empowered and creates sustainability so that when the next disaster strikes, we live in a world where emergencies happen, where disasters happen. The risk has been reduced and the community is better prepared. So the other kind of reflection point for me was, how can NGO networks contribute to risk mitigation, emergency response, and recovery efforts in the event of disasters? And I think it's really important to acknowledge that LHF and other networks are leaders of mitigation, response, and recovery because they strengthen communities while supporting response and recovery. They create sustainable and adaptable local response systems and connections that live beyond attention and resources. And I think we are in a very particular moment of understanding the impact of what happens when attention and resources shift or go away. And it is only through, as Dr. Kohler mentioned, a increased focus on this type of locally led recovery that we will make it without, we will navigate this moment in time of much decreased resources. Finally, LHF and other networks help determine the best way to ensure inclusion of the most marginalized, and those are often the most impacted folks when a disaster happens. So it ensures that they're included in safe ways and that they have voices in their own recoveries. All of these things meet the needs of disaster impacted communities better and reduce the risks that communities are facing in the future, ensuring that less harm is done the next time a disaster strikes. To sum up, this type of local network and funding approach is a key factor in sustainability. And moreover, I would argue that it is really the only way forward in a time when we have such limited resources. I would be remiss if I didn't add that the successes laid out in the impact study and the challenges are a challenge to philanthropy and to funders to go further in funding these types of activities. And using the flexibilities that those of us in the philanthropy world have, we can center and empower communities in determining their own paths in recovery. And I will just close by putting out a little call that if there's anyone here who wants to have further conversations, in particular about how philanthropic donors can work together to support these types of efforts, my contact information is here and we would be very willing to have that type of conversation. Just close by saying thank you for including CDP today and congratulations for the incredible work done.
Çok teşekkürler Tracy. Biz de katıldığınız için çok teşekkür ederiz. Aslında bir diğer güven ilişkisine dayalı donörümüz burada, KCOC. TİF'in çalışmalarının bir kısmı da yerel örgütlerin görünürlüğünü arttırabilmekte. Bu görünürlüğü arttırma sürecinde birden fazla geniş çaplı organizasyon yaptık ve farklı farklı gruplara aslında yerel örgütlere güvenebileceklerini aktardık. Bunları yaparken de KCOC bizim partnerimizdi. Ben sözü Faye'ye vermek isterim. Sayın Faye, siz de aktarırsanız KCOC tarafında TİF'le olan ilişki nasıldı, neden desteklediniz TİF'i diye sözü size bırakıyorum.
Hey, teşekkürler and merhaba. So can everyone hear me? Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting KCOC to this such an important event. And I really want to thank to the organizers for the STL and then the LHF. So it was truly an honor and a privilege for us to join the journey of the local humanitarian forum alongside the STL. So it was great learning even for us. So before I answer the questions, the guiding questions, I would like to share some of the reflections that I had today from the keynote speakers and the presenters. So the localization, I find it is a process of shifting mind, reaching to shifting power as a destination. So that means how difficult it is to change the mind. So we all know that even from the behavioral science perspectives. So starting from mind shift, and then we need definitely more experiment, and then we need more evidence, and then we need more of those lessons from trials and error. So that means we need also a safe space to make a mistake, and that eventually leads us to learning. So from this aspect, LHF's journey was great. It's really critical and symbolic in all this localization process. So we need more of this kind of cases widely shared. So thank you once again then to the STL and LHF for your bold decision to make it happen. And then and push for these locally led responses in Turkey's earthquake. So without further ado, let me then share my reflections on the questions why KCOC supported LHF. So actually, it all begins with our inherent nature of being a national NGO platform in Korea. KCOC is a national NGO platform. We have over 140 Korean humanitarian and development NGOs working across the globe. So we basically represent Korean NGOs, our members, at national and international level, and then we provide services for our members, such as capacity strengthening and ensuring quality and accountability in their humanitarian actions. And we also intermediate between the donors and our members. So that's by our nature, we function as an intermediary and convener. We also link actors and facilitating coordination in times of disasters. So when this kind of disaster happened in other countries, then it was a natural process for us to seek out a legitimate and representative national NGO network. So especially in contexts like where there is already strong national capacity and vibrant civil society, then it's easier for us to search for those NGO network. So in our process, in the process of our search, we encountered the localization advocacy group and then AFET Forumu, that in Turkish disaster management platform, and then LHF. So, and it became very clear to us that STL was playing a facilitative and a convening role for these networks, and including LHF. So, and then furthermore, we received multiple strong recommendations on the performance of STL. So STL has very strong credibility. So, and then also STL's commitment to locally led responses and their capacity to bring diverse actors together made them a very ideal partner for KCOC. But then as an NGO network, we do not normally directly implement any project overseas, because we are a network, and then we sometimes disperse grants on behalf of the government or our national general public. We didn't have to do all this emergency response or post-earthquake recovery act by ourselves. So we definitely needed a partner, and then we really wanted to reach out to those national NGO network, because they know the local and national context better. So even from the beginning, our approach was to finding a national NGO network, because we believed in their inherent nature of those networks. And this approach actually was not our first time, because after the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, we also partnered with JANIC, which is the Tokyo-based Japanese NGO network. So we supported their local coordination efforts. So then that partnership actually taught us that strengthening existing networks is more efficient and sustainable and respecting their own system. So supporting a national and local NGO network like LHF was very natural and strategic choice for us. So from our perspectives, LHF embodied the values and principles that we find very important. So one is that we build on the existing capacity instead of making a new one. And that network has the legitimacy through the broad representation of diverse actors. And then their inclusive participation is actually reaching out to a deeper level of local actors, not just the local NGOs, but they reached out to the affected people themselves. So these are not only programmatic strengths, but also very vital indicators of trust and ownership. So that's how KCOC supported LHF. And then how can NGO network support localization? Then, as I mentioned, it's actually enhancing the NGO network can enhance the representation and legitimacy. So they amplify the voices of the diverse actors, and whether that's small or marginalized, regional based. So they giving them a seat at the decision-making tables. And also they serve as a legitimate interlocutors with government and UN agencies and donors by representing a broader community. So that's what network can do with the broader representation, wider representation. And also the way they support the localization is through the facilitating coordination and collective actions. So these networks reduce the fragmentation by creating common platforms for joint planning and problem solving and advocacy. So they enable shared learning and harmonized approaches and coordinated responses in times of crisis. So it actually this network approach help. So moving from isolated efforts to strategic and more collective influences. And also, as we also channeled funding through STL to LHF, networks can act as intermediaries, very important intermediaries of grant-making platforms and redistributing funding to local actors. So that's how we also supported those CBOs and local organizations through a micro grant project. So that was it's a very important aspect of how NGO network like LHF can support localization, because their legitimacy and then their inherent nature of coordination body representation makes it localization a bit more how do you say, feasible. So that's I find the importance of how NGO network can support the localization. And then I also, as SEMA in the report highlighted, that the sustainability remains but still the biggest challenge. So I had few points to share some of those areas to consider for us together. So the system-wide, the evolving the role of OCHA, I have to say. So the transition from the sole coordinator to enabler of national and local platform, I find it very important. So when you say like when you talk about the intermediate role of intermediaries, from the direct implementation to the enabler, and then I find that role has to be also as same as the OCHA's role also play that role in the future, and gradually handing over leadership to local leaders once the systems are in place. So OCHA is in a great position to do this, to link with other national NGO platforms and local NGO platforms. So I think that is also maybe in the future of OCHA's evolving role, and more of enabler of coordination. And also those, as I understand, LHF was created in right after the earthquake. But then we also have to think about how one organization or network created out of disaster, which one would be more sustainable? Or the network organizations existed before the disaster and then they expand or scale up their in times of disaster or post emergencies. So what would last longer and stand longer in terms of sustainability? Then I may have to say that's easier to choose the latter part, because the organization has already existing structure and function, and they can make themselves a bit more flexible or agile depending on the context. So it has some issues related to how to make this coordination body sustainable. So it's important, I think, how we can these kind of organizations make their system more agile and also the flexible, and then having those the mandate, adapting those mandates that support both emergency responses and also longer time community engagement. Because right after the disaster, the funding cuts and then the roles dissolved, but then there should be at least one or two, the lean structure to continue. So not easily, but expandable, and also make it lean. So try to make it, it's always challenging. And that's what KCOC is also faced in terms of our own role. And then because the disaster time and the normal time, the needs are so different, but then it's still important to have the structure in place. And then it's diversifying funding sources really key, because in times of disaster, there are so much of the funding from different funding sources, but then after the recovery phase ended, then all those funding cuts, and then this kind of organization really has to diversify the funding sources from like a membership or service deliveries or government subsidies. So there should be, this system has to be linked with the national system. So that's, I find it really important in terms of the sustainability of the organizations. And then the diversity and inclusion is, I think it's really a continuous dialogue. So how wide should our representation be, geographically and thematically and across the diverse community groups? And also how deep must the outreach go to ensure the most marginalized have genuine voice? So this diversity and inclusion is never-ending question. So there has to be constantly asking ourselves, how deep and wide, how diverse? So it's continuum of the balancing. So that is the issues that I wanted to share together, issues to consider. And maybe my time is already up. So I would like to thank again for this wonderful event and sharing this impact study with us. And I think this LHF model has to be really widespread, and then allowing this kind of key lessons from this study has to be more, so make a great example and then evidences for future, for more study like this happening. And then we allow this safe space for trials and errors and building evidences out of this. Then that way we can change our mind, we can shift our mind, and then we need more evidences, then we can also change the power dynamics, as this case has already shown. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your attendance. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler değerli katkılarınız için Faye. Burada aslında birkaç farklı konudan bahsettiniz ve hani onlarla ilgili TİF tarafından bir yorum yapmak isterim. Donorlar genelde yerel örgütlere ulaşırken kredibilitesi yüksek ulusal kurumlarla çalışmak, nasıl çalıştığını bildiği kurumlarla çalışmak üzerine daha motive olabiliyorlar. Bunu fark ettik zamanla. TİF'in de buradaki en önemli katkılarından bir tanesi belki ulusal kurumlar, donörler ve yerel örgütler arasındaki o eşitlik düzeyinde katılımcı ve topluluğu odağına alan bir model geliştirmiş olması diyebiliriz. Bu bağlamda da ulusal kurumların çalışma biçimini değiştirmeye yönelik hani böyle bir model geliştirebildiğimiz için mutlu hissediyoruz. Bir yandan da bunu yaygınlaştırmak için elimizden geleni yapacağız ve TİF 3 yıllık bir stratejiyle çalışmaya başlamıştı. Burada da artık sosyal etki analizinin sonuçları da bize bir yeni sürece girmemiz gerektiğini söylüyor. Bu yeni süreçte umuyorum ki liderliği yerel liderlere bırakarak ilerleyebildiğimiz bir tasarım yapabileceğiz diyeyim. Süremizi biraz aştığımın farkındayım. Sadece varsa Sayın Doktor Köyler'den bütün bu tartışmaların üstüne bir katkısı, onu duymak isterim. Bir de chatte 2 tane soru bulunuyor şu anda. Sonrasında da o sorulara cevap vererek kapatmak isterim. En fazla 10 dakikanızı daha rica edeceğim diyeyim. Sözü size bırakabilirim Doktor Köyler.
Oh, thank you very much. I think we have heard an incredible wealth of analysis and information. First, I would like to really congratulate our friends at CDP and in Korea for having taken the courage to support LHF. And I think the results that Umut-can presented the study shows very clearly that local action is not the exception. It should be the norm because there is competence. And this competence is in many regards more direct, more central, and more relevant than the competence of international players. So I think it's an excellent example. I'm not astonished because I know a little bit Turkey, and I'm sure that, of course, this absolutely atrocious experience of the earthquake some years ago has led to a lot of learning processes and a lot of actually capacity building in Turkish civil society and in the Turkish aid environment. But what is possible in Turkey is also possible in other countries. In my previous function, especially when I was still in the service of the European Union, I had the opportunity of traveling basically to most of the major crisis hotspots in the world. And I have always been struck by the fact that even under the most difficult circumstances, in countries where there is a blatant lack of governance, where there's a huge lack of funding, you find extremely competent and diligent local organizations that do not only know to do the technical work, but they also actually know very much the principles of humanitarian aid. They know what the international environment requires. They have a certain idea about what donors need, what donors want, what their own surveillance and diligence systems require from them, and so forth. Maybe what they didn't know every time is on how to write exactly a request for a project or for money or so in this or that bureaucracy. But apart from that, capacity was absolutely there. And I think what you told us about LHF's experience and about the general Turkish experience is further proof to this. So everything we heard so far, and of course we all know, as we're all based in real life, that there are enormous problems and there are enormous learning experiences that are still to be done by everybody, by all of us. This is just a part of normal life. But I think what you showed here is clearly the best proof that local experience is not just a nice additional accessory element in the humanitarian system, but it should be one of the founding pillars of any action in the future. This is very important as a message to the established system, but it's also important, I think, as a message to the many countries where such local experience exists, because it means that they should not view humanitarian aid as an outside interference, even a benign one, but they should see it as a requirement, actually, of good governance. And where they cannot perform such services themselves for the help of local populations or internally displaced people or refugees from countries abroad that need to be assisted, they need to create at least enabling conditions in order to let local organizations do their work. I think the message that we can send from this meeting goes at least in two directions. It goes to the established players in a system that for 70, 80 years has given its proof of validity, but that now really needs to adapt to a new world, not only to a new financial situation, but it's also a message, I think, to all those emerging players, authorities, not only national governments, but also, for example, regional governments, local councils in cities and so forth, everybody who has access to resources and everybody who has the possibility of making the life more difficult or less difficult for those local organizations that can be helpful and can perform operations. Local initiatives shouldn't be seen as a competition to anybody, but as the most efficient way of help people who deserve help. And I think this message cannot be spread enough. Therefore, I'm very, very happy that you invited me being part of this. I will certainly report back to my colleagues in Geneva about this, but I would encourage you at LHF to seek contact with many national reference groups and other forums of the kind in other crisis situations to share your experience and basically encourage them to go the same way that you have already been able to go. Over to you.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Şu an gelmiş olan birkaç tane soru var aslında. Biraz sekreteryanın çalışma biçimine yönelik sorular. O sebeple doğrudan ben cevaplayabilirim. Az sonra chat'e yansıtmış olacağım. Sizler de görebileceksiniz. TİF bu çalışmalarında kaç kişilik bir ekiple çalıştı diye bir soru var. Sekreterya yapısından kısaca bahsedebilirim. TİF en kalabalık olduğu dönemde 5 kişilik bir ekiple çalıştı. Tüm bu çalışmaları 5 kişiyle yaptı. 4'ü sahalarda il koordinatörleri, bir tanesi de birazcık daha genel forum tarafında çalışan bir koordinatör olmak suretiyle. Ancak 2025 yılının başı itibariyle fon kısıtlarından kaynaklı olarak sahalardaki çalışmalar durdu. Şu an hani sadece forum koordinatörü pozisyonuyla devam ediyoruz. Ben varım. Ama biz yaptığımız işi her zaman kolektif bir çalışma olarak tanımladık. Dolayısıyla 5 kişiden çok daha fazlasıydık. Verdiğimiz kararlarda herhangi bir yöntemi belirlerken veya herhangi bir uygulamayı yaparken yerel danışma kurulları kurduk. Kurduğumuz bu kurullarla birlikte karar verdik. Neyi nasıl yapacağımıza ya da herhangi bir projeyi nasıl şekillendireceğimize yine yerel örgütlerle birlikte karar verdik. Dolayısıyla hani 5 kişi gibi görünüyorduk sahada. Şu an 1 kişi gibi görünüyoruz. Ama çok fazla yerel partnerle birlikte çalışarak bu süreci yürütüyoruz. E, Bu sayı yeterli miydi diye sorulmuş yine aynı soruda. Sekreteryanın sayısı tam olarak yeterli diyemeyiz. Çünkü Umutcan'ın sunumunda da yer aldığı gibi bir görüşmecinin bahsettiği şekilde TİF hani bir ısırık alınmış elmalardı diye. O deneme sürecinde çok fazla şeyi hayal edip çok fazla şeyi gerçekleştirmeye çabaladık. Oralarda da elbette ki eksiklerimiz oldu. Burada bu etki analizinin ve bugün yaptığımız konuşmaların sonuçlarını artık tartıştığımız, genel kurullar birlikte tartıştığımız ve yeni bir modellemeye gittiğimiz bir süreçte olacağız. Ve hani artık belki birazcık daha sadeleşmiş odaklı çalışmalarla ilerleyeceğiz diyebilirim. Bir yandan da esnek ve değişken bir hibe modalitesi olduğundan bahsedilmişti etki analizi sunumunda. Buna donörlerin nasıl ikna olduğu veya donörlerle ilişkide burada herhangi bir problem çıkıp çıkmadığından bahsedilen bir soru var. Burada da aslında yerel örgütlerin kapasitesine odaklı, hızlı, esnek ve ihtiyaca göre değişebilen hibeler tasarladık biz. Ve hibeleri de aslında en başta genel bir tasarı üstünden modellemedik. İhtiyaca göre değişen şekilde modelledik. Burada az önce bahsettiğim gibi donörlerimiz zaten bu yaklaşımla çalışan donörler olduğu için zorlandığımızı söyleyemem. Ancak elbette evrensel standartlara uygun bir raporlama yapmamız gerekiyordu. Oralarda da aradaki boşluğu sekreterya olarak biz doldurduk ve her zaman mottomuz yerel örgütlere güvenli hata yapabilecekleri alanlar sağlamaktı. Hibeleri verirken de bu güvenli hata alanlarını tutuyor olmaktı. Birlikte öğrenerek ilerledik. Birebir mentörlük yaparak ilerledik. Bu şekilde de aslında hani pek çok proje bitirdik. Donörlerimizin ya da üçüncü parti denetçilerin denetimlerinden geçtik. Bunlarda da hiçbir geri bildirim almadan süreçleri tamamlamış olduk. Yani yapılabiliyor diyebilirim. Bir diğer soru yerel finansmana yönelik yürüttüğünüz çalışmalar yerel finansmana yönelik iyi uygulamalar var mıydı sorusu. Burada aslında raporda pek çok örnekten bahsediyoruz. Bu az önce söylediğim finansmanı yerele indirirken yerelin kapasitesine uygun ve ihtiyaçlarına uygun bir raporlama biçimi belirlemek galiba en anlamlı katkılardan bir tanesiydi TİF'in mikro hibe programları kapsamında. Ancak bir diğer taraftan da önümüzdeki dönemde CDP'nin desteğiyle birlikte Türkiye'ye uygun hızlı, esnek ve alternatif bir fon modeli çalışması yapacağız. Böyle bir fon modeli geliştirip sonrasında da uygulamasını yürüteceğiz diyebilirim. Burada Sema bir söz istiyor. Sema'ya söz vereyim. O sırada uzunca da bir soru gelmiş. Onu okuyayım.
Teşekkürler Asuman. Maybe just a brief response to examples of locally led funding mechanisms. Of course, what we call a locally led funding mechanism is very nuanced and it's very contextual. So it's very specific to the country or the context that it's designed in. However, I can share that the NEAR network has what they call a global change fund. So this is a fund led by the NEAR network, and NEAR network has hundreds, over 200 members globally. of local organizations that are based in the global south. So this is one example, but there are also, I know, locally led funding mechanisms that are in progress. It's a work in progress. They have them in Pakistan, Somalia, Nepal, just to name a few. But like I said, it's very nuanced. So each locally led funding mechanism in itself is a co-design process, and the outcome could look very different from one context to another. I just wanted to share that.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum Sema. Az önce gelenler soru değil, katkıymış. Onu da hemencecik yayınlıyorum herkesin görebilmesi için. Varsa son sözler, onları almak isterim. Buradan da herkes buradayken ve hani bütün çalışmaları bu kadar detaylı dinlemişken sekreteryada görev almış bütün arkadaşlarıma buradan teşekkür ederim. Çok büyük bir emek ve özveriyle, ortak bir yaklaşım ve ortak bir bilinçle çalışmalar yürütüldü diyorum. Teşekkürümü iletiyorum. Siz değerli katılımcılara teşekkürlerimi iletiyorum. Bundan sonraki süreçte de artık hani yeni çalışmalarla karşınızda olabilmek dileğiyle diyorum. Son bir ekleme yoksa da burada kapatabiliriz. Çok teşekkürler. Hoşça kalın.
Teşekkürler herkese.
Teşekkürler.
Thank you everyone. Bye.